Certainly to be scared has been part of human nature since its very beginnings.
What Alien says about us now are those fears that we have, which may be those fears that show up when we're dreaming, the nightmares.
I think he took a lot of techniques from Alfred Hitchcock in the sense that you don't really see everything. The imagination is used, and I think that's what made it so terrifying.
I think once you're making a movie, you better keep that pressure on all the way through. On anything, actually. But God knows on a thriller, or God knows it's a marathon of tension.
I've gone to films my whole life since I was a kid. I mean, I loved movies, and intuitively I knew that it was a thing I wanted to do more than anything. But the raising I had, my background, didn't suggest that that was a practical thing to do for a living.
I was a theater arts major in college. I wasn't a film major at UCLA. And I did love theater, but I realized after a while, after producing a couple of plays, that I had to stay in New York because that's where the investors are. And I hated the weather so much that the closest thing to theater was film. And I grew up in LA, so I decided, the hell with that, I'm not going to live in that freezing cold. I'll go into film.
I applied to USC, NYU, UCLA. NYU, UCLA blew me off, USC accepted. So I came out there and I was a student in the USC Department of Cinema. Met up with John Carpenter. John Carpenter started to do this master's thesis film, a science fiction movie. I got involved in it, and it grew out of hand. It finally got too big for a student movie, and so in the end, we ended up finding a way to put it into theaters. And instead of the most impressive student film ever made, we had the least impressive professional film ever made. A lot of things bothered me about Dark Star. We had an alien in it, which was a beach ball. It was our second try on that alien. I went away from Dark Star really wanting to do an alien that looked real. A couple of years down the line, I decided to do Dark Star as a horror movie instead of a comedy. And that was the germ of Alien.
When we got to talking, I realized that Dan was a cinema student at USC, and it was in the process of making a kind of a spoof on 2001, a small film called Dark Star, and he was surprised to find that that was my secret love, was film, and particularly fantastic cinema always attracted me. So basically, I helped out on Dark Star.
I had heard about Dark Star, and somebody was telling me about these two brilliant young guys, and sci-fi was my love, really. I also like suspense, but I went to see Dark Star, and I spoke to Carpenter on the phone, and I spoke to Dan on the phone. But it seemed to me I just had a more rapport with Dan just from the phone conversations, and I told him I had the rights to what became Total Recall, which was the original story by Phil Dick, was called We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. So he knew the story. He said, I love that. Yeah, he said, you got the rights to that? I said, yeah. He said, okay, and I got something I got to discuss with you that I have been working on about a year, and I need to make a breakthrough, and maybe you're the guy that can make me have it happen. And that turned out to be Alien.
I had this opening. I didn't know where it was going to go. I knew I wanted to do a scary movie on a spaceship with a small number of astronauts. Like I say, Dark Star is a horror movie instead of a comedy. And I had this creepy opening in which astronauts awaken to find that their voyage home has been interrupted. They're receiving a signal from this mysterious planetoid in an alien language. They go down to investigate. They get stalled down there. Their ship breaks down.
I've got 29 pages written, but I don't know you. I can't trust you to leave the house with this. The story, I, of course, know you have nothing written in the story. I said, no, I've just got the rights to the story. I hadn't yet tried to write it yet. And he said, okay, will you sit here and just read this? And this is what I got. I'm stuck on it, frankly, but read this. So I sat there and I read it, and it was very close to what we actually ended up with on the screen, those first 29 pages.
The threat at the center of the story, whatever this monster or thing or danger was going to be. It was not at all clear to me at this point.
The first act is fantastic. I said, oh, you know, possibly, maybe I can help you with it. And he said, okay, I can help you in Total Recall. So we decided, however, that we would tackle Alien first because Total Recall would be way more expensive because at that time we envisioned Alien could be a Roger Corman movie, just in one location, you know, several different rooms in an old warehouse.
A Chilean filmmaker named Alejandro Jodorowsky telephoned me from Paris. Was it Paris, France? Or Paris, Texas? No, Paris, France. He had made an art film called El Topo, which was very well received. And this man, over this transatlantic phone line, claimed that he had the backing and the rights to make a feature film of Dune.
And he loved Dan's work that he did on designing the special effects for Dark Star. And he knew he had to do it at a budget with some creative people. So he hired Dan to work on it, help him with the storyline and also with the special effects. And Dan went off within a few weeks. He went off to Paris and France and places and was working on the Dune project there for 6 months.
And I wasn't the only person there. He had gone to England and he had plucked up an artist who did covers for science fiction books named Christopher Foss. And for the first time, I saw somebody whose stuff I liked as much as Ron Cobb's stuff. He had another artist he wanted me to meet. He had seen this guy's work in a show that was in Paris at the time. Took me over to one of the really fancy hotels in Paris, not the one I was staying in, where this artist named Hans Rudi Giger was staying while his show was on display in Paris. Giger brings out this little tinfoil. He said, "Would you like some opium?" I said, "Why do you take that?" He said, "I am afraid of my visions." He said, "It's only your mind." He said, "That is what I'm afraid of." He brings out a book, art book, with his paintings in it. And I started looking at this, and he and Alejandro go into a big discussion about Dune. I started looking at these paintings, and it took a minute for it to register what I was seeing, but what I was seeing seemed to be very disturbing.
Oft-told story of that was Dan, of course, working on the Jodorowsky Dune in Paris for a year or two, and it all collapsed, and he went home with no money and whatever it is, and slept on Ron Shoussett's couch.
And I was in desperation. The only thing I could think to do, I had to sell a script.
So he said, now light up the board, Ron. I've got this first act, and you like it. And he says, I know, you have a good mind from these just weeks and weeks I've worked with you before I left, and what I saw you did on Total Recall, which you did the short story. As far as you got it, I know you can make the breakthrough for me.
Well, Star Beast is one of those titles that you think of, and then you throw them away. I was running through titles, and they all stank. I didn't like any of them. One morning at 3 o'clock, Ronnie's apartment, I'm typing away, writing dialogue, and the characters are saying the alien this and the alien that, and suddenly that word alien just sort of came up out of the typewriter at me. I said, alien. It's a noun and it's an adjective. I said, yes, that's it. I have the title.
It's simple. It's one word, and no one's ever used it. And never changed from that moment on. No one ever tried. The title stuck, and that was amazing to us, even just that aspect of it.
I went to storage, got my typewriter out, took it over to Ronnie Shoussette's living room, and wrote it up. Over the days and nights of the next 3 months, Ron keeping me alive by feeding me hot dogs.
Dan said, somehow the monster has to get on board the ship in a way that'll amaze everybody. And so I woke up in the middle of the night and I said, Dan, I have an idea. And he said, what? And I said, the monster screws one of the people. He says, what? What are you talking about? I said, he jumps in his face, plants a tube down him, inserts his seed in him, and later it comes bursting out of his stomach. And Dan goes, oh, my God, that's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. And we just sat up all night and we wrote, and in 3 weeks, we had I would say, which is 85% of the plot, the structure. We didn't write the screenplay right there, of what you saw became Alien, 85%.
And whether they drew from other movies, they probably did, like everybody. They drew consciously or self-consciously from things like The Terror from Beyond Space, but they actually, the ingredient of this thing being incubated in a human being made the whole damn thing stand out.
Ronnie wanted to be on board once I had written the thing. He saw it as a, a viable thing he wanted to be involved with. So we made ourselves a little deal. He would be on board as producer, and we started trotting it around and showing it to various, producing entities. And we got pretty close to deals in a couple of times, but they fell through, well, essentially because the people on the other end were demanding too much. They were trying to screw us.
And so we went to Roger Corman's company. But then I think we were dealing with Bob Remy, who later became head of Universal. Corman was out of town. And he said, yes. So, right, that looks like a pretty amazing success story. He loved that Dan's movie was good, even though it didn't make money. He knew that I co-wrote this with Dan, though I'd never made a movie in my life because I took my name off the other. And we were going to make a deal, but we didn't get to signing the papers. Or Alien would have been made as a low-budget Corman movie.
A friend of ours named Mark Haggard ended up with a copy of it in his hands. He used to be an independent writer-director.
Mark said, "Can I read this great script they're all talking about you have?" And Dan said, "Sure." So, we gave him the script, and he just said, "Let's just wait a few days, and then we'll close our deal with Corman." Well, he calls us, of course, the same night. He said, "It's great, it's live, and I can get the money. I can get the money immediately." So we looked at each other, and we said, "Okay, well, look, we can't wait. We don't want to blow the deal with Corman. It's got to be a limited time." He said, 2 weeks. Give me 2 weeks.
Mark Haggard knew Walter Hill, a director of tough guy movies. Gave it to Walter Hill. Walter Hill showed it to his partner, David Giler, and then they showed it to their third partner, Gordon Carroll. The three of them had just formed a new production company called Brandywine Films.
We had offices at the then Goldwyn Studios, now Warner Hollywood, and Walter's office was on the first floor, ground floor. And after lunch one day, he was sitting in his chair, ruminating, with the window open. And a friend of his was walking down the alleyway, and he stopped and said, "Walter."
This guy handed him the script through the window, and he read it, and he said, "Well, I may be out of my mind." He said, "I think this." He says, "But I mean, the script is terrible, but it has one great scene in it, and read it and tell me what you think." I read it, and I thought it was absolutely terrible. And I called him up, and I said, "Well, you are nuts. This is crazy. Would you come to the big scene?" I said, "Yeah, you think jumps out, and it's on his face." He said, "That's not it." I said, "Look, I'm already on page 90. I said, he said, "Keep reading." And I came to the chest burster, and I called him back and said, "Well, I see what you mean."
They brought it to me. I thought it was interesting. A nice horror picture in outer space. I mean, what could sound better? And they then completely rewrote the script from top to bottom.
What I didn't understand when we made the deal with Brandywine, Giler and Hill, was that Giler and Hill wanted more than to produce this film. I didn't figure this out until, in fact, after principal photography. But they targeted my script since they decided they wanted all the credit for the screenplay, and they didn't want me to have any.
Right from the beginning, David and Walter did several drafts. And it was the whole character of the film, not the spine of it in terms of story, even though that was changed quite a bit. But the whole character of the film changed when Walter and David took it over.
As Walter himself said in one of the speeches he gave us during pre-production, he said, "The greatest thing I have to bring to this project is I don't know anything about science fiction, and I don't like it." And that was certainly reflected in the various drafts that they did.
They took several cracks at drafts, and they, from all consensuses, they were getting worse, not better, because that wasn't their forte. They did recognize it was great, but they weren't good at making it better or, in fact, at not making it even worse. To agree, I'm going to modify that with one exception. They made a huge contribution. But in the many drafts they did, most people felt it was losing. But that happens sometimes because you take a shot and then you sometimes come back to what attracted you in the first place. And they did radically. They did 8 different drafts.
For some reason I couldn't figure out, Walter Hill immediately started doing rewrites of my script. I remember walking into Gordon Carroll's office and seeing a script on the desk and lifting up the page, and it said Alien by Walter Hill. Gordon walks in. I said, Gordon, what's this? Gordon looked very embarrassed. He said, oh, you're not supposed to see that.
But they contributed one thing, which is one of the best things in the movie, and I will eternally be thankful to them, not only for starting the ball for financing, but to contributing this to the movie. What they invented was the robot. That was not in the movie, where the robot's Ash is a robot and his head comes off. That whole idea and scenario was theirs.
We rewrote it top to bottom. I mean, all of the dialogue, all the characters, the whole sense of truck drivers in space, the whole, plot with the robot, the whole with Ian Holm, with all the rest of that stuff. That's all in the new script.
The only thing I could see he was doing was just stirring around the elements. First thing he did was change the names of all of the characters. One early discussion, Walter walks into the offices there at 20th Century Fox, and he said, I hate all those names in your script. He hates all the names. I mean, how do you hate a name? Oh, I hate all those names. So he changed them all. Of course, he didn't hate them at all. But he had the naive idea that if you changed all of the characters' names, this would count somehow as being a substantial rewrite of the material.
With a story that's as often told as this kind of story is, you have to do it in a special way in order for it to be special. I mean, that's was our argument about the movie in general with Fox all the time, and I think they agreed, which was that you had to treat this kind of B monster movie as though it were an A movie.
That script did not excite Fox enough for them to say, we want to go ahead and we want to make it. It must be remembered that this was pre-Star Wars. And we were confident, although we had other places we could set the film up, we were confident that Fox would ultimately, with another rewrite and whatever, would ultimately do it. We certainly hoped so. And when Star Wars came out and was the extraordinary hit that it was, then suddenly science fiction became the hot genre.
I don't know that there was a consensus one way or the other about science fiction. I mean, since I was the responsible party for making Star Wars, and it was such a hit, concerns about science fiction went away very quickly.
They wanted to follow through on Star Wars, and they wanted to follow through fast. And the only spaceship script they had sitting on their desk was Alien. So they green-lighted it. Wham. I wrote Alien thinking I was going to direct it. That's one of the reasons that I hadn't developed the characters. I mean, it was developing the alien itself was such a complex problem that I thought, well, I'll put the characters off for a later draft.
It went, as most things do, through a period of trying to get a package. But this, when you're going with the studios and they offer top dollar, they went to everybody. Every top A-level actor and director.
We had asked Walter at first place if he wanted to direct it. And since he was part of the package.
Walter was originally going to do it. And then he decided that he did not have the temperament for special effects.
Apparently Gordon talked to Robert Aldrich. Didn't like what Aldrich had to say. He asked Aldrich how he would handle the face-hugging creature. Aldrich said, oh, no problem. I'll just go to the market and get a liver and throw it on the guy's face. Gordon didn't want to hear that.
I was convinced that it wasn't a small picture, that the way to do it was to scale it up and to do it with whatever sense of craft and design and to make it an A picture.
Peter Yates, the studio wanted. We weren't crazy about that idea, but I think he didn't want to do it finally. I talked to Jack Clayton about it, and he didn't want to do it.
And everybody said no, because they said, we had no credibility, and of course directors would make it have credibility, but almost none of them wanted to do it. They thought it was a stupid monster movie, a dumb thing with something coming out of your chest like a Japanese horror movie, and none of them had the vision. None of the A-level directors we went to had the vision to see it.
You needed to have a director that was going to give it some kind of real, other than traditional science fiction look. You had to have real actors in it. You had to have, all of that. And never let on that it was a B monster movie, but make it deliver on that, at that level.
In those days, I think between The Duelist, which had been something that was completely driven by myself and my pocketbook, because I found the writer, found the story, paid for the script, got no fee, and was the completion bond. So that was my first experience in the movie business.
I saw The Duelists at Cannes and talked to Sandy Lieberson, who knew Ridley pretty well, who was the head of, Sandy was head of Fox in Europe. And we kind of presented him as the candidate.
Walter Hill and I went, screened the picture that he had done, and The Duelists. We were absolutely stunned by his control of the picture, his mounting of the film. It really is an extraordinary film with a lot of depth, richness.
All of a sudden, they said that they had met with a director none of us had heard of, named Ridley Scott, who was a director of commercials from England. I said, what has he done? I said, he did a film called The Duelists. And they screened it for us. Very nice looking picture. I couldn't see what it had to do with science fiction, but they weren't looking at it from that perspective, and they may have had a point.
Someone had seen The Duelist at Cannes, which got a prize at Cannes. And out of the blue came this offer. I think it must have been within about 6 months, actually. And I read the script, and I think within 26 hours I was standing in Hollywood. I read the script, said, I'll do it. They said, you will? I said, yeah. So I was flown out. So I suddenly started to feel the Hollywood machine kicking in.
I think it is really clever casting, in actual fact, the fact that somebody who's obviously got a good eye and also would give a completely different quality to what could have been a very sort of, maybe an exciting, but nonetheless a B movie.
That first encounter was good, and then I went back and said, what I have to do is storyboard the movie. So with great excitement and glee, I storyboarded the movie in London, which actually took me 3.5 weeks. I worked day and night, went back with the boards, and the budget doubled, which just shows the power of a well-thought-through storyboard, because we went from 4.2 to 8.4 or something like that, because they suddenly saw a way to do the film which was, not doing it in a bunch of sets that looked like painted cardboard boxes with a dodgy man in a rubber suit running around as the Beast, but in fact, I'd put a statement into it. I had I don't like the word, but had a vision of what to do with the spacecraft and what to do with the spacesuits, and I was fully influenced at that moment, mostly by 2001, actually. Oh, and Star Wars. I thought that first Star Wars was formidable. But that was the fairy story, you see. Star Wars is the fairy story. I was going to do the Texas Chainsaw Massacre of science fictions, which I still think Texas is one of the most formidable. If you're going to do a horror movie, there it is.
Being a horror film and a sci-fi fanatic, I kept sort of saying, well, this is a film you've got to see, because he hadn't really seen many of those things, and I think, so I was trying to sort of, in my own naive way, educate him as to, well, this is a sci-fi great, Ridley, you've got to see this, you've got to see It, the Terror from Beyond Space, or all that sort of thing, and Ridley sort of looked at him as sort of an absolute horror, because he wasn't excited by any of them. I think the only thing he was excited by was Texas Chainsaw Massacre, actually.
I always felt it was a pretty straightforward action thriller. The old dark house, basically. And we're going to watch them each get taken out by this terrible beast. That's as B movie as you can get.
Whoever directed this movie, was not going to quit on a monster until he has it, you can believe it, that it'll look right. And I thought that was the single most important thing you could have for this movie.
The thing that really worried me most of all, because I figured I could get all the environment right, all the costumes right, you can get the casting right. But who was this beast? What was this beast going to be? And that's where we started talking, in great detail about Giga.
Ridley did one thing which enamored him to me. First time I met him, I shoved Giger's art book into his hands.
And I saw the Giger illustrations of that one in Necronomicon, which I thought, that's it, that's no question, that's it. I talked at length with Dan O'Bannon on this, and he said, what do you think? I said, that's it. He said, that's right.
And the idea that came to me looking at Giger's paintings was, you know, if somebody could get this guy to design a monster movie, you'd have something completely original no one had ever seen before.
But Fox hated Giger's work because they said, people stay away in droves. This is so ghastly. It's too much. It's too much. It's repulsive. And we said, no, it's done so beautifully. It all depends on the way the director utilizes it.
It's the first question you ask, what is the alien going to look like? Is it going to be a guy in a rubber suit with fins? And Dan opened Necronomicon, Giger's book, and we were just stunned. Same thing with Ridley. The first second that Ridley saw Giger's work, he knew that the biggest single design problem, maybe the biggest problem in the film, had been solved.
I just thought it was stunning, and I just stuck to my guns saying, no, that's it. And they said, but let's bring him in and talk some concepts. I said, no, you can't do that. That's it. We want to be shooting by so-and-so. That's it. Just to get this right is going to be incredibly difficult. This is beautiful, not just threatening, and also has very sexual connotations. So in everything, it's like a rather beautiful humanoid, biomechanoid insect. So then I flew to Zurich because old Giger will not get on a jet. Terrified of flying. I think he's probably still terrified of flying. And I met him at his house, and I found him to be very nice and very sweet and very articulate and very specific. And he started going down this thing, and I'll redesign. I said, no. So we went through the same conversation again. I said, you don't need to. You've got 5 other things to design. Right through from egg, facehugger, chestburster, and then, what's that? 3. Then the beast.
I didn't want to have eyes because it makes the monster more dangerous. It's more scary, and because you never know where the monster is looking. This is the painting, the old alien that Ridley Scott wanted to have for his film, and that called Necronom number 4, and I did it in 1976. The only thing in the alien is the difference is that they are kind of sunglasses. Now we have this kind of shell, and here the tail, it's different. And yeah, also the other things like these tubes, and this is like the alien. First, it was only a short time I should draw the monster. I did this here in Zurich, and then I had to come, then I haven't heard anything, and then I had to come to England. So he said, please come over for 3 or 4 weeks. And then at the end, I was about 5 months there, I think. Altogether 7 months. Ridley wants that I do the 3 monsters. That was the facehugger, the chestburster, and the big alien. And then later on, I could do the rest of the surrounding of the alien.
I was using Dune as my model of how to design a science fiction movie, the idea of getting great artists together in a room and having them all work. And we were doing that on Alien. It was me in charge instead of Jodorowsky. And we had the walls full of these dazzling designs for everything in the movie.
He had a kind of a wish list of people he wanted to work on this film. One was Hans-Rudi Giger, myself, and Chris Foss, the British science fiction illustrator. And he always had this dream project that all 3 of us would work on this one film, and he got his way. And even before there was a director, Chris and I had a series of little art department above an old sound stage on Fox for a long time, drawing and meeting directors as they would come in and look at the drawings and try to find out who was going to do what and when and where and if it would ever go.
I knew Ron as a political cartoonist from the Los Angeles Free Press. Everybody loved his cartoons. And I had the gall to actually call him on the phone and go visit him in his apartment in Westwood. We became friends that way. And I discovered something at that time was not known about him, that he did science fictional paintings. And they were incredible.
Dan came to me with the script, the original script that he and Ron Shusett had written for Alien, and had me read it, and it was quite amazing. I was quite, and he wondered if I could help him do some visualizations, a series of paintings that he could send around with the script, and I did quite a few, and but we were still groping as to what the thing should look like. But I was very, very interested in astronautics and space flight and aerospace design and ideas of the future, and also science fiction as a kind of future mythology. So all this just clicked with me, and I was very, very excited about it. We all contributed all kinds of things for the different versions of the script, and Chris Voss just turned out tons and tons of exterior drawings of what the ship should look like, and we kind of differed in that he was very metaphorical and sort of fantastic, and I was very interested in tapping the idea of what things could look like if they were drawn from a more realistic consideration of what a spaceship should be, without going NASA. Create the sense of confined space, spaces at a premium inside, that the idea that it was, with all the pressure doors, that it was pressurized, all those things I thought would contribute to the tension of the film. And they weren't particularly there in the in a lot of the early versions and visions of what it should look like. So I had to do a lot of persuading.
Ron Cobb was going to do the monster, and he had some drawings and all the rest of that stuff. And Ron's a real talented guy, and ended up doing a lot of the ship, but his monster was not too hot.
He kind of designed the sort of spaceship interiors and thing. I think the sort of Nostromo and the Narcissus, he did those kind of designs because he had, I mean, he's rather like Sid Mead was to Blade Runner. He just had that expert. They were founded in logic, you know, and in reality.
This guy thinks like something's engineered. He's got a mind that he designed something that really seems like it'll work, a functioning model. He's so believable. He can make them so accurate.
I was more concerned with the Nostromo, because I knew that was going to be my ultimate contribution, would be to bring the Nostromo to life. When finally we would get Giger on board, and not just having him mail things in, he would be involved with the alien planet and the alien. We all knew that that's what Dan wanted, you know. Chris Voss was to sort of take care of the exterior of the ship, and I was going to do the interior sets. There would be a production designer, but Dan wanted all our inputs to be very much noted.
I used to be very into the Metal Hurlant, the heavy metal comics from France, and all the Mobius and people like that. And I think I'd managed to infect Ridley with that enthusiasm, etc. He could treat sci-fi in the same way that he treated history, you know, like The Duelists. Before that, he was the sort of he was the expert at everything. He put a different slant on shooting historical things. Because it was just, I guess it was his eye for detail, really.
I was steeped in heavy metal comics of those at that particular time, like Metal Hurlant and you know, a lot of Mobius's stuff actually. And I was very impressed by that. And I was just in those days trying to wonder, how do I apply this to movies? You know, how do I apply this kind of really fresh and beautifully visual thinking to film? And here it was. You need a hook when you're starting something, and my hook was my boards. I drew the boards, drew the corridors, drew the spacesuits. When you're drawing boards and corridors and spacesuits, you're also sucking yourself into story, because I'm literally doing it, you know, chapter by chapter, scene by scene. And you get ideas as you're drawing them. And the ideas fall into place not just as ideas, but as technological possibilities. And when that first idea comes, I tend to go with it and follow it.
only 7 or 8 people in the whole movie. So Ridley had said to me one day, he said, I'm going to cast every other role with the most brilliant actor I can that doesn't need help from me, because I'm going to concentrate on the visual style.
We had wanted not to use a classic star for the film.
When you see, and talk, and people read and read and read, and there's always one that suddenly goes bang, that's the one.
Ridley Scott had asked me to cast his first film, which was The Duelists, and we'd worked together really well, and it was very enjoyable. So totally different from Aliens. It was Napoleonic Wars full of character actors.
First of all, I felt I wanted to see every actor in the United States in the directory. Okay, so I think we did see every actor in the United States, in Los Angeles, New York.
It was about as far removed as you could get from his first film, because the script was very, very linear. It was very few stage directions. You could not tell who was a man and who was a woman. I sensed deliberately.
We wrote it to be all men. So I'm getting everybody their due. There's a lot of people that had to make some good guesses here. I think maybe that's the only way most of the really great movies get made. But there's somebody in each spot that's doing something amazing, and you don't think of it, and wow, it's part of what makes it magic.
David Giler and Walter, who sort of took over the writing from Ron and from Dan, I think they came up, I'm not sure whether it was David or not, idea of sort of to try and break the mold of making Ripley a woman, and of kind of making it more, I mean, the truck drivers in space analogy I think is a pretty good one, and that appealed to Ridley because, the thing that didn't appeal to him as an art director was sort of, shiny Flash Gordon surfaces and things like that. He wanted the thing to be just like a battered old truck where there was bits of tape over cracks in the chairs they sat in and things like that.
And we realized that studios might resist it. Even though we went to Corman first, we thought that Fox might not make the movie unless we managed to make it as commercial as possible. So we had a little asterisk. Please note, any one of the crew members, or let's say 2, could be females if you want to have it go for a wider, broader appeal. But to all truth, we did not in any way remotely conceive the idea that the lead, Ripley, would be a woman.
We were looking it over, and Walter and I sort of thought, here's this one character, not too interesting, and we thought, this studio, this is made, I hate to say this, but for very cynical reasons, this studio is making Julia and Turning Point, and they really believe in the return of the woman's movie. So we get a lot of points, if we turn this character into a woman, and it'll just make the character more interesting.
She wasn't originally in the original script. Originally, the protagonist was a male.
So Laddie said to us one day, can Ripley be a woman? And we looked at each other, we said, yeah, but it seems kind of funny. I mean, they've never done that, a woman in a space horror movie as the leading character. And he said, well, I have a feeling that's going to make it unique.
And we started going through lists of actresses and who was right for the role. You have to remember that Sigourney Weaver in those days was not a big star, and she tested for the part.
I got this audition. They'd sent me the script, which, of course, not knowing the Rambaldi designs, I pictured this big yellow blob of gelatin chasing these people, and nothing as elegant as what it turned out to be. And I actually went to the wrong place. And I called my agent and I said, it was like Friday afternoon. I said, I don't know, the script was, she said, just go.
I'd met Sigourney on the last go in New York. She'd come recommended because of a play that she'd been doing on Broadway. She was known as a real comer on Broadway, right? And I didn't see the play, I just met her.
As I remember, we were in the Regency Hotel at the time. Sigourney, for some reason, had gone to another hotel. We did not know this. And she was due at, 2:30, and 2:30 arrives, and 2:45 arrives. 10 minutes to 3 arrives, and then we hear, I can't say running feet in the corridor, but we hear fast-paced feet coming toward the door and then slowing down and composing itself. And the bell rings and Mary opens the door, and Ripley was standing there. This extraordinary-looking woman, tall, commanding presence.
And I was wearing these very high hooker boots, and I looked about 7 feet tall.
In a very nerve-wracking situation, projecting composure, but you knew that just an eighth of an inch behind that composure was a very nervous actress, a very tense actress. And that was exactly right for what we knew, David and I knew immediately.
And was very impressed by her, height, and she's a very impressive character, very intelligent, and seemed to make sense to me. So I expressed this to Laddie, who said, "Yeah, but you got a test." And I said, "But I'm 3 weeks from principal photography."
And we got to do what was basically a run-through of the movie with the real kind of set. And, I was afraid it would be like me and a potted palm, and I'd have to go. But he gave me this whole run-through, which as an actor I really appreciated.
Sigourney was the last one to get cast. The sets, the test I shot in were the sets I was building. That was the Nostromo. We didn't rattle that together. I was actually building, so it was scary.
What I didn't like about it that much was my performance, because I was trying to be tough instead of just... What I discovered in the course of this, which was my first film basically, was you don't try to... You just play each scene for what it is instead of trying to work on an arc. The people aren't consistent. They would be different in a love scene than they would be as they're fighting an alien.
They screen tested many people, but she was dynamite. You saw it right there in the screen test, as you saw later in the movie. This was her very first film. It's all behind the eyes.
My intuition, always in casting, is from the second they walk through the door. When I see somebody walk through that door, I knew somehow this was her.
Then there was the second woman, Lambert, but it was a difficult one to finally arrive at Veronica Cartwright. I can't remember the film she'd been in before, but she played a way out, weird sort of character, and she had a particular intensity and unconventional looks which made her very, very right for it.
I went on an interview in Los Angeles, and I met with the casting people there. Originally, I had read for Ripley, and I was called back, and I read again for Ripley with Ridley there. Then I was due to go over to England. So I had gone over for vacation. So I talked to my agent before I left, and I said, "Are they still casting for Alien? I mean, I might as well go see them again, or at least let them know that I'm here." So I went in again, and I read again while I was there. And then I found out, I come home, but I find out I get it. So I go over thinking I'm doing the part of Ripley. Nobody bothered told me that I was doing the part of Lambert until they called to do wardrobe. And they said, "Well, you need to come in and to get your gear and stuff for Lambert." And I said, "Oh, I'm not playing Lambert, I'm playing Ripley." "Oh, no, that part's been cast." So I said, "Well, wait a minute. I haven't even read this script from another perspective." So here I am in England. I call back my agent. I said, "Aren't I doing Ripley?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, they said that I'm doing Lambert." So I said, "Well, I'm going to have to reread this script and see." So I reread it, and it bothered me a lot that she was so weepy all the time. I mean, every time she seemed to, but they convinced me that I was the audience's fears. I was reflection of what the audience is feeling.
What you wanted to avoid all the way through was these people looking like just ordinary, bland, nice, middle-of-the-road, middle-class people. That would not have... They had to be vivid. You know, you were stuck with them in this capsule, or whatever you want to call it, for a long time, and they had to be vivid and very clearly defined.
When I read Alien initially, I wasn't drawn to the project. Ridley wasn't attached. It was, my understanding was going to be a $2 or $3 million budget on it. And I thought, well, you're not going to make an effective film for that. And, you know, it's a nice piece of material, has potential, but you're not giving it that potential. And that, I thought, was that. And about a month later, I got a call from England, one of the producers at the time, and told me that Ridley was going to be directing it and that there was a budget that would realize the potential. And then it became something else. It became working with Ridley Scott and learning about filmmaking.
What Ridley's vision, as far as the actors were concerned, was he wanted it very much to be not of any time or any world. So it was important there was a mixture of nationalities. I cannot remember if Yaphet Kotto's character was written as such, but he was obviously perfect for that part because he's so vivid, a wonderful actor.
When I first met Ridley, first meeting we had, I said, I don't like science fiction films or monster pictures. I opened with that, which was obviously a good opening. And he said, well, actually, I don't either, but I think I can make something of this one.
The casting of John Hurt, I think it is known that there was another actor originally playing that part, John Finch, who became ill, and we had to recast.
Probably identified at that moment very strongly by playing Macbeth for Polanski. I'd been impressed by Polanski's work anyway, but particularly also by Finch. And so he said, yeah, sure, I'd love to do this. He came on board. First day, first shot, he starts to look as yellow as this pencil. And I thought, God, what's wrong? And we did a couple of takes, and he seemed absolute lackluster, no energy. He's sagging in his seat. And we cut, and I got up and went over to him and said, what's up, you all right? He said, no, I'm terrible. I said, I feel terrible. He said, how do I look? I said, terrible. And we had to lift him out of his seat, and he was carried away. And it turns out that he was a diabetic.
I had been asked if I'd like to do Alien, but I had already committed to the South African film, so that was dropped. And the actor that was going to play Kane later, for one reason or another, had to drop out.
That night, we had a quick regroup in the office, and that night I drove to Hampstead Village and met with John Hurt.
And then they heard that I was then free, so Ridley Scott came to me and we talked till gone midnight, say on the Monday.
Prepared him, of course, for what it was, and he said, so when do I start? And I said, tomorrow morning.
And on the Tuesday morning, I was on the set at 7:30. So it was not a usual film for me. The script didn't arrive, and I didn't mull it over, and I didn't decide this, that, and the other. I had a long pitch from Ridley, and a very interesting one, too. And by the end of it, I said, okay, Ridley, you better send the car around now to take me out to the studio.
I think life and acting and everything is so full of those things. What if it hadn't happened? Like, nobody knows. I think John Hurt would probably still have exactly the same career because he's done so much varied and wonderful work. That really brings us to Ian Holm, who I think is the most wonderful actor and hadn't done anything like that at all before. And Ridley was really thrilled that he wanted to do it. And in those days, he'd done very little film. He'd done a bit of television, but he was really very much a theatre star.
Casting was extensive, and even though it's only for 7 people, at the end of the day, I think it's a pretty definitive cast.
The casting is enormously important to the whole making of the film, to the director's concept of the film, because it does so much work for the director just innately in who you cast. It gives the director so much to work with, or not, if it's not properly cast. So it is an extraordinarily sort of subtle skill that's difficult to explain, but people who know about filmmaking understand it, and audiences who don't know about it appreciate it without always understanding what they're appreciating.